All right, I gotta tell you, for a lot of people, and I am one of those people, a new Sufjan Stevens album, that's a big event. Like, you put it in the calendar. Sufjan album, time to encounter some big feelings. Today on the podcast, you'll hear how Sufjan gives us permission to cry. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. Hey, we're going to start by going back to 2005.
I made a lot of mistakes in my mind, in my mind. You came to take us. All things go to recreate.
If we had met in 2005, you would have heard me listening to this. That's the sound of my 2005. I'm just starting university. I'm surrounded by these big orchestrals, these sweeping vocals, the self-deprecating lyrics. This was a moment. This was a breakthrough moment for indie rock. Sufjan Stevens is one of the most beloved figures of that era. He's taken a lot of detours since then, we should say. He experimented with maximalism in the age of ads. He scored the Oscar-winning movie Call Me By Your Name, and he made, I'm just going to say, the saddest Christmas album of all time. Well, Sufjan's got a new album. It's called Javelin. It is his 10th, and he is at his songwriting best. It is this record that is devastating and romantic in the best possible ways.
Frightened of the end, I'm drowning in my self-defense. Now punish me, think of me as what you will. I grow like a cancer. I'm pressed out in the rain. Deliver me from the poison pain.
Craig Jenkins and Mel Woods are here to pick through the emotional wreckage of Sufjan Stevens' Javelin. Craig, Mel, thank you both for being here. I'm really excited to go through this with you. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.
Thank you.
Craig, I gotta say, you put on the new Sufjan Stevens album. One of the first words he says to you are, "I'm frightened of the end." And you go, yep, we're in it now. We're truly in the sort of Sufjan mode. You started your Vulture review by saying that Sufjan Stevens has, quote, long evaded easy categorization. We're talking about musically, romantically, philosophically. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Well, so let's talk about what happens after the 2005 album. People have fallen in love with this sound, and they spend the next couple of years waiting for him to return to it. After, the Avalanche album of, outtakes from the Illinois album comes out, it's another couple of years before you get him back into the Age of Odds mode even. And everything that he does in between are all these just fascinating experiments that get into different corners of his creativity. Mm-hmm. And he's stacked. He can do arrangements. He can do, he could produce, he can play all this strange synth stuff. And, you would just get him diving into those pockets and keeping people on their toes.
There's a real tendency, I think, to either sort of focus sonically on what Sufjan is doing or lyrically on what he's doing. And sometimes when you combine the two of them, like on this record, you get this kind of dissonance of the most beautiful arrangements possible and the saddest possible lyrics. Is this a hallmark at this point for Sufjan, Craig?
Yeah. He's just that voice is, there's a sweetness to it. There's an innocence to it that just counteracts, undercuts what he's saying, or it adds a dynamic tension that all this stuff is coming out of this, vessel. Yeah. And that's definitely part of the thing. He's into all these, instruments, these really delicate, strange stuff that most people don't think to play, to stick into a record like the one that he's making.
Yeah. I have to say, Mel, for me, the thing that really sticks out about Sufjan is that, you hear a lot of those instrumentations. You don't hear a lot of those instrumentations doing that particular work. You sort of, in a way, it's what a twee sound. And then, the content of it is the deepest grappling with death you ever heard. We got to say, Mel, on the day that this album was released, Sufjan wrote this beautiful dedication to his partner, Evans Richardson, who died in the spring. Sufjan referenced being in love with men in his music, but this is kind of the first time he's talked about a relationship publicly. How did you react when you saw that post?
Yeah, I mean, it was a mixture of kind of grieving along with him, along with kind of this validation and confirmation. I and many people have had many big gay feelings to Sufjan music. That's he makes big feeling music for big gay feelings. I came up during the Carrie and Lowell era, was my university of listening to Sufjan, and the Carrie and Lowell album may be arguably the saddest Sufjan album.
That's his album about his mother's death. Yeah.
And so it's interesting seeing this kind of enter his canon of grief and enter his canon of big feelings and working through things, and to have that extra kind of layer of knowing that he loved and was loved, and that influenced this music in such a way really kind of enriches the listening spirit experience, and kind of makes you feel, we don't know these artists, and you can write the most personal lyrics in the world, these intimate things, and it feels like we know this person. But to get a little life detail like that is both a reminder that we don't actually know this person. We don't actually know, where he's not actually our shoulder that we've been crying on for all these years. He's a guy making music who has his own life, his own love, and his own grief. And I think it was a really big feelings, a lot of big feelings.
I do actually want to come back to that notion of Sufjan as a confessional or not confessional songwriter, because I think he's flirted a lot with that notion without necessarily fully committing to it. But also we should say that after the album came out and that statement came out, Mel, a lot of the media ran these headlines about Sufjan Stevens had officially, quote unquote, come out. You wrote this piece for Extra Magazine about this media response. How did you feel about that?
Yeah, it was a bit frustrating, I think, because I think he's been obviously out to the people who matter for a long time. So what does it really mean to come out, and what does it mean to come out publicly? And I think it distracted from, again, what is a spectacular album of itself, and also from, his grief and mourning this person. To have that kind of be shoehorned into an easy coming out narrative is really, really frustrating. I think does a disservice to the music and to, again, the life that he's in his late 40s. He's been out and about, it's a different story. And I think we have this obsession with categorizing people and defining them by things. And instead, I think we should just be focusing on the big gay feelings that the music makes and has been making for years.
Okay, so in that context then, Craig, let's go back to this idea of Sufjan as confessional and maybe not confessional. He's kind of managed to remain pretty mysterious. You never really know what he's doing in between albums. He's not one of those artists where you can keep track of them. But he's also weaved a lot of the intimate details of his life into his lyrics. But then Javelin comes out and he's open not only about what he's going through in terms of losing a partner, but also about the fact that he was diagnosed with a pretty serious autoimmune disease. Then you hear this album that is grappling with death, that is grappling with the sort of fleeting nature of life. How do you think that context changes how we listen to this album?
I don't know that it should, but I mean, I guess on paper you can file under terrible things happening to this guy and beautiful music coming out of it, as in the case of Carrie and Lowell, as in the case of any really, darkly autobiographical song, like the one from Illinois about, the friend who's dying. That stuff galvanizes him, unfortunately, in a way, I don't know, it's like his art is just clear-eyed in a way that it isn't always, or that that it doesn't necessarily feel like it needs to be in those dark times. But yeah, I mean, I guess there is definitely the urge to see this as, here's another instance of this guy, persevering and this terrible stuff in his life making him reevaluate and appreciate, what we have. But there's also the issue that the record itself doesn't necessarily lend itself to that reading. There's a lot of breakup sounding stuff in it. And once again, we should never feel safe in our assumption of knowing what's going on with the guy, even when we get, the bits of clarity that we do, I think.
Well, in that sense, actually, let's listen to a little bit more of Javelin. Here's a bit of Will Anybody Ever Love Me?
Will anybody ever love me? For good reasons, without grievance, not for sport. Will anybody ever love me? In every season, pledge allegiance to my heart. Pledge allegiance to my burning heart.
Come on. I mean, that is one of the most accessible songs on this record, but also it's a song that is just so deeply burrows into his loneliness. But at the same time, when you make a song about loneliness, you don't typically have these massive choirs behind you as you're singing about how alone you are. Craig, when you hear that song, where does it take you?
I mean, I think that the arrangement is a commentary on what's happening in the lyrics. That's how I like to read it. I like to think that the question is answered in the, chorus of voices and in the beauty of the song, and that he's saying something else than what's in the lyrics. I don't know, but, he's not easy to read necessarily.
As in, he's answering himself and being like, yes, you can be loved. Look at this choir of people being like, we're
so.
here. Yeah. I love that reading. I love that. That's a beautiful reading.
Now, at least that's the one that I'm giving myself that prevents from the, really calamitous emotional one.
That's fair.
Maybe I'm doing that for myself.
Those are the two ends, I think, of receiving this music as like just wildly uplifting or calamitous, in terms of despair. Mel, what about you? Where do you fall on this?
Yeah, I agree completely with that. And I think that that's one of the beauties of the music that he makes is he can have those contradictions and contrasts between, music that sounds very joyful and effervescent. And then you listen to the words and go, wait, oh no. And it's definitely that. It gets to this kind of relatable core. And I think that's what people have connected to for so long. And why, I say it's soundtracked with so many big feelings. You're not having necessarily the same feelings, but he finds these little poetic turns of phrase and these little singular kind of lines and couplets and bits that just go over and over in your head when something bad is happening to you, or at least that's just me. And it's like, I know next time I'm feeling, will anybody ever love me? I'm going to hear this song kind of on repeat in the back of my head. And I think that's a really universal experience and one of the gifts of his songwriting.
I mean, that's the medicine to loneliness, right? Is sort of putting it in there so that the next time you have that question, it's inextricable from the way that you remember this particular song. I want to listen to the title track next. Here's a bit of Javelin.
Searching through the snow for the javelin I had not meant to throw right at you. For if it had hit its mark, there'd be blood in the place where you stood.
And for a song that runs 1 minute and 52 seconds, that song is an entire novel on its own. Craig, how do you feel about this song?
I always, when he makes any kind of biblical reference, like really dig into what he's saying.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's something that didn't necessarily come up in the reviews. Is that song Javelin is referencing a story in the Bible where King Saul is, being, I guess you could call it, driven to madness. A difficult, portion of the book among difficult portions of the book. And so there's David, who's going to be the next king. And then there's Saul's son, Jonathan. And, Saul in a rage hurls the javelin and is like, so this is a reference to that story, but it's also talking about, relationship, woes and feelings. And then you have to, contend with the stuff where there's a lot of different interpretations of what's going on in that story, but some people feel like David and Jonathan were in a relationship in that book. And so and I know that he is a scholar of such things and of such intersections between the intersections of faith and sexuality. I feel like are important to his music. It's particularly in the album Seven Swans, which I like a lot, and in stuff just like you never know who he's talking about. And there used to be a Facebook that was is this Sufjan song about Jesus or a guy? So
I mean, the answer is yes. The answer is always it's both.
The answer is
you don't have to choose.
Yeah, whatever you wanted to get out of it is what's there. So he can just be tapping on a zillion layers in 1.5 minutes, and also just on the surface be emotionally destructive. I keep using destructive, but it's I'm responding to how it feels to be listening to this guy going through this thing, and it's
yes,
a minefield. He's in the middle of.
A minefield is exactly the way to put it. You know what? Let's go out on Shit Talk. It's 8.5 minutes long. We can't play all of that, but here's a bit of it.
A romantic second chance instead. I buried it with the hatchet. With your antics, put them at the foot of the bed and set it on fire. I will
Mel, sometimes I think when a musician does an 8.5 minute long song, it's going to stitch together a lot of different ideas. No, he really is exploring one musical idea and so beautifully. He's sitting, for the most part, in that musical idea. What do you think of Shit Talk?
It really is kind of just this, and it's so repetitive too, is the thing. You know, you look at the actual lyrics of this song, and there's not that many lyrics because it's just these kind of choruses building on top of each other over and over and over again. And, you know, I first listened to it when I was riding my bike along the seawall here in Vancouver at night, past like the city lights, and feeling very like reflective. And, you know, this song is about a relationship. It's about fights in a relationship. It's about kind of still loving somebody through a lot of those fights and things. And again, just really hits at a lot of feelings. And I think we'll come back to this one if and when I am in some tough spots and really reflect on it.
I think if people are looking for big feelings, the Sufjan album is the one to go to. Craig Jenkins, Mel Woods, I appreciate you guys being here. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Craig Jenkins is a music critic at Vulture in New York. Mel Woods is a senior editor at Extra Magazine in Vancouver. Both of them wrote incredible pieces about this Sufjan album and Sufjan Stevens in general. You got to go read them. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and you are listening to Commotion. Okay, listen, the new season of the NBA starts tomorrow, and the rivalry that people are paying attention to is not on the basketball court. It's Woj versus Shams. Okay, that's ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski and The Athletic's Shams Charania. Who are these people? Well, they are certainly not players. You could call them reporters, but they describe themselves differently. They describe themselves as NBA insiders, and they are obsessed with getting the latest scoop and then tweeting it first. At one point, Woj was a mentor for Shams, and that competition between them has basically become described as like a Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker situation. What does it say about sports journalism that this is the biggest story in the NBA at the moment? To break it all down, we've got Shireen Ahmed. Shireen, what's up, friend? How are you?
I'm good. How are you, pal?
I'm great. I'm happy that you're here. I want to talk about this. Let's get into it. What is at the heart of this rivalry between these two guys?
Okay, so we could talk about media and the dynamic way that media moves and digital platforms and this and weaving in, you know, betting and this element and that element. Essentially, it's egos. There are two guys that are super competitive. They never actually made any varsity basketball team. They never played. But they have a tenacity and a competition which is enthralling to people. And they're the drama. And the first rule of J School is don't be the story. They are the story. We're talking about this story. But you know, that's what it is. It's competition. It's who can win. And they're both absolute, you know, textbooks examples of that.
I mean, it's competition, but it's also like a little bit of Shakespeare, right? Like there's an element of Shakespeare in this just because one in a sense sort of taught the other how to do this. We got to get into that. Woj and Shams have different origin stories. Can you please give us a Shakespearean background behind these two?
This isn't really Othello, is it? I'm just like, anyways. So Woj is older. He's like a late 50s, I think now. Started off, I had a very successful career as a columnist at one point. I mean, I followed his stuff sort of distantly just to keep, because he was someone to follow, even very respected columnist, actually. And then ended up moving to Yahoo Sports. But then in a nutshell, ESPN was like, we need to hire this guy because like every single story we have to credit him because that's what you have to do journalistically. Yeah. Whoever breaks the story gets the attribution. So they hired him. Shams is younger. His story is really interesting. He actually didn't go get any formal training. He started working when he was in high school. And he reached out to people. He just had you know that saying, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. The old
credit that to Wayne Gretzky, allegedly.
Wayne Gretzky. Yeah. He never stopped shooting in high school. And as a professor of journalism, I aspire for these students. But after reading this guy's story, I'm like, I don't want a student like this. It's too much. I can't even. But he came up. He's from Illinois. You know, I remember reading at one point that the Bulls wouldn't even give him a pass because he's too young, a media pass for the press box. Right. But so he would drive to other states to cover the games there. Like he's just relentless and just so incredibly driven. And sometimes I think he would have been an amazing investigative reporter with this type of ethic. Like, what could he, so, but anyway, Shams is younger. He has always had a career within the digital space. And I mean that Twitter was around when he was working and got into the industry, whereas Shams really Woj really came up in the traditional, I filed columns kind of thing.
Right.
Not to be super critical, but Shams's writing is not one that I would show in my classroom. The copy is not something I would say.
Shots fired. Let's go. That's great.
No, I mean, you know me. This is gonna happen.
But I think what's worth mentioning here is that it's the stories that they're covering, because we're not talking about sort of in-depth analysis of the world of sports. We're talking about beating everybody else by a few minutes in terms of breaking, which team is picking up which player. But it's those few minutes that make a difference. So what are the kinds of stories that they're breaking?
So it could be anything from potential trades. It could be hirings and firings. It could be in so much that it can be lineups, which is not encouraged because people get upset. You can't tweet out a potential lineup
of the team that they're going to play that night.
Team,
yeah.
Exactly. You can't do that. And at one point, I remember also Coach Steve Kerr of the Golden State Warriors said that he felt like Shams had a mole in the room, and you don't want that. And you don't want any information being leaked out that could be picked up by another team, because also, don't forget, this isn't just about these two. This is a whole billion-dollar industry here. Yeah. NBA is massive. And there's when you compound that with the gambling part and the betting industry that has come up, then, what they tweet could potentially affect. It also affected if they tweet out potential draft ideas, that could affect how people bet on NBA draft selections. Right. And even though they argue that they're insiders, and we can get into that and what that really means as opposed to being a journalist, I think that can affect outcomes. And that's
why don't we get into it, actually? Why don't we get into that distinction between NBA insiders and not reporters? Because that is, in fact, they're like, no, we're not reporters. We're an entirely different thing. What do you make of that distinction?
I think that's really interesting because Woj actually started out as somebody who was reporting. And I think in the early days, that's exactly what Shams did too.
Right.
They were, but with Twitter and word count limit and X, former Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, I think that's what we're
Twitter
calling
to me,
it.
pal, but I take Twitter. Your point. Yeah.
So the thing is that what are they now? And when you're tweeting, as opposed to your form of dissemination is Twitter largely, or digital platforms such as TikTok, which are very viable storytelling and options to share. It's just that, where is the line here? Are they being transparent, first of all? And there was questions about Shams. I mean, he works for FanDuel at the same time.
FanDuel, the betting platform that he's got a sponsorship platform with them. Yeah.
Exactly. But that's a red flag. I mean, if what your work does affects the betting industry, it doesn't make sense to be working for an agency that specializes in betting. It's something that is honestly a red flag from the get-go. So I think those are certain elements about it. And at this point, they are, hustling, and, their methods of getting in touch with people, 20 texts an hour. I think some people who Shams is chasing for comment or quotes or tips, they're literally just pushing so hard. And I'm not saying those aren't journalistic tactics, but it's just okay, what's the end result? What's the intention? And what's the end result here?
So what people maybe don't know is that Shams works for The Athletic, which is a subscription-based sports news website that the New York Times bought last year. The New York Times bought them, and then the New York Times shut down their own sports section. The last sports section of the New York Times was published last month. This is what I'm curious about. The fact that Shams works for The Athletic, and the fact that The Athletic has now basically replaced the New York Times, this is interesting to me. What does it say to you about where sports journalism is right now?
It's veering on no longer procedural journalism. It's going into numbers. And I mean, you can argue that it is journalism and it isn't. I don't think that's the point here. I think to say that this is where the industry is going and we need to pay attention. I think it's important for Shams to be challenged and to Woj and to any insiders to be challenged in terms of what their role is and how are they doing their job. And, I think these are important points that we should still do as people who are surveying the landscape. But at the same time, it's like, this is really where it is. People get their information in just at their fingertips really, really quickly. And it's considered, I was talking to a student and then I said, hey, has this been confirmed? And he's like, oh yeah, Shams tweeted it. And I was like, okay, so let's find out if there's like an actual story. It can be,
but that's telling, right? Like that's telling in the sense that like their information is viewed as like so good and so reliable. And maybe that tells us something about how well connected they are. Let's talk a little bit actually about how they get this information, because the sourcing is just as important as the stuff that they're doing.
Well, absolutely. That comes from relationships and that comes from building that throughout your career and legitimacy. They're viewed as legitimate. And if I was an agent and I had to, if I wanted a player I represented to either be traded or had some news about that player, I would absolutely send it to one of them.
So you wouldn't send it to like ESPN. You'd be like, I'm going to send it to Woj or I'm going to send it to Shams directly. Like those are the places that you'd send it to.
Absolutely. Like I have no aspirations to ever be an agent of anyone, but if I was, I would send it there because that's what you do. I mean, as a journalist, as someone who covers these spaces, that's not my process, but the process for them is to hound. That's what they do. So as opposed to being like the 1940s in the back alleys of the Maple Leaf Gardens with a trench coat and a notepad and a fedora, they're just texting people constantly. And they're, in reaching out to them to try to get any snippet of information to out-edge the other. And I don't know if it's their, origin story in that sense was Shams trying to beat Woj, but and this is conjecture, but what I know of the both of them, and I was around to see Shams, his star rise, was just he realized he was within range to pass him, and that's what he's doing. I think the Utes, they call them Utes.
You call them Utes, yes.
Utes, I call them you. They really relate to Shams a lot. They look to him. I mean, Woj is like sort of a more storied journalist per se, but Shams is the one whose fingers fly faster.
They sure do. There was, I was reading this New York Magazine profile of Shams that came out maybe a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And one really striking detail of that profile, Shireen, was that he's on his phone for like 18 hours a day. And he like very proudly is like, but when I'm on vacation, it's only 12 hours a day. I'm like, that's not a life. Like I was listening to that. I was like, okay, yes, you have this incredible career, but also you sound a little bit like a prisoner of your own phone. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I was like, if I did that on vacation, like I think every member of my family would disown me. It's just, but it's also the life you choose. Like I like, let's be honest. I work a lot. You work a lot, and our phone is the way that we stay connected. But what almost is a little bit perturbing is that he won't even take a vacation where he's not poolside, so he can't access his phone. Shams, I'm saying, doesn't play pickup basketball anymore because he doesn't want to miss a tip. You're literally, you're held captive by your phone and the potential of the work or the tips that come. And I don't think that's, I mean, are we talking about balance here? Like when's the last time one of them went on a retreat in Arizona or something? I don't know.
Well, I think if you're Woj, you certainly can't do that now. You got this guy sort of, catching up behind you or maybe surpassing you. You mentioned the FanDuel thing. I want to talk about it a little bit. Shams works as a commentator for the sports betting website FanDuel. Listen, you've been doing this for a long time. In this particular career choice, it is unthinkable a few years ago to imagine that a sports journalist would be doing that. People who cover sports also participating in sports betting relationships. That is, to say it's a red flag in terms of like the general ethics of sports journalism is, would be an understatement. But now Shams sort of seems to be getting this exception. What do you make of that?
I think that he is careful to say, well, I'm not necessarily doing this while I'm doing this, and this couldn't necessarily affect this. Like, those are some of the statements he's making. I mean, he's a really smart guy. Yeah. There's no question. And when I say smart guy, he even, sort of admits he was a C student, but I don't think grades are necessarily a reflection of someone's intelligence. Yeah. He is really like street smart. He's scrappy, and he's not going to go out there and jeopardize his entire career over one move. But I do really think that he walks along a very blurred line. Right. And I don't love that, because I think when someone starts to question your merit and your ethics, your reputation is what you have in journalism. And if that goes, it's hard to get back. It's harder for others, arguably, but it's tough. And I don't know why that's allowed. I mean, I have actually no interest in sitting down with him. I'm more interested, if I could get a sit down, I'd actually want to talk to Woj and be like, are you irritated by this kid? Well, that's what I want to know. I want to sit down with him to sort of, talk about that. But it's almost like Shams is laser visioned, and he's just going forward and won't be interrupted by anything, like, at all.
Listen, Woj versus Shams, the rivalry seems to overshadow anything else that's happening in the NBA right now. What does this tell you about where sports journalism is going?
I think I've always said that I believe that we have to be dynamic in the field. I think that using multi-platforms like digital and otherwise are really important, and reminding students to have like multi-skill and be able to do that. But I do think there's a way to, put out something ethically and along the lines with that journalistic ethos, meaning make sure he doesn't have to cite his sources, because his sources can be quiet, but there's just like this procedural thing that you need to rely on. Otherwise, anyone can make anything up. And if it's confirmed, and, they've both been in trouble at some point to have to walk something back. At one point, I remember Woj got in trouble for saying F you to a senator a couple of years ago. As a reply, the senator requested that players get the right to say what they want. And this particular issue was about Hong Kong freedom. So this is like 2019, I think. And Woj he had to apologize publicly. And, Shams has been in hot water as well. I know that ahead of the draft, fans get really angry because Woj tweets out what he thinks the first 3 draft picks are going to be, and it ruins it for people because, like, where they're going to go. The moment is to be thrilled and invigorated and engaged, and they kind of ruin it. It's spoilers. Nobody likes spoilers. You didn't think that sports could be a thing that could be spoiled, but you got these two people who are kind of doing that in a way. Well, I mean, what this really tells me? That people should just be watching the WNBA and forget all this. That's what this is really what it tells me. I know the season for the W is over, but look, I mean, that's something else that's an interesting comparison, that the culture of those two leagues is really different. And there's competition, obviously, and healthy competition in journalism to get scoops, to break stories, to be engaged around a sport and a burgeoning sport and a league. But this is it a slow news day that we're discussing like Woj and Shams?
Shireen, I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate your wisdom, because I just do whatever Shireen tells me to do. Thanks for being here, friend.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Shireen Ahmed is a senior contributor with CBC Sports. She also teaches sports journalism at Toronto Metropolitan University. And that's it for the podcast today. Remember, you can listen to any episode of the show anytime you like, wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Hey, I'm going to be here tomorrow. I'll see you then.